Chapter 3. As she led me upstairs, she advised me to hide the candle and keep quiet. Her master had peculiar ideas about the room she was putting me in, and never willingly allowed anyone to stay there. I asked why. She didn't know, she replied. She had only been there a year or two, and with all their strange happenings, she couldn't even begin to be curious. Too dazed to be curious myself, I locked the door and looked around for the bed. The room's furnishings consisted of a chair, a wardrobe, and a large oak case with squares cut out near the top, resembling coach windows. As I approached the structure, I peered inside and realized it was a unique, old-fashioned couch, cleverly designed to eliminate the need for each family member to have a separate room. Essentially, it was a small closet with the window ledge it enclosed, serving as a makeshift table. I slid back the paneled sides, climbed in with my light, pulled them shut again, and felt secure from the watchful eyes of Heathcliff and everyone else. On the ledge where I placed my candle, a few mildewed books were stacked in one corner, and the surface was covered with writing scratched into the paint. This writing was nothing more than a name repeated in various styles. Large and small, Catherine Earnshaw, occasionally altered to Catherine Heathcliff, and then again to Catherine Linton. In a state of dull listlessness, I leaned my head against the window and continued to spell out Catherine Earnshaw, Heathcliff, Linton, until my eyes closed. But they had barely rested for 5 minutes when a blaze of white letters emerged from the darkness. As vivid as ghosts, the air teemed with Catherines. Jolting myself awake to dispel the intrusive name, I noticed my candle wick had drooped onto one of the antique volumes, filling the space with the scent of roasted calf skin. I snuffed it out, and feeling uneasy with a lingering chill and nausea, sat up and opened the damaged book on my knee. It was a testament, printed in lean type and reeking of mustiness. A flyleaf bore the inscription, Catherine Earnshaw, her book, dated some 25 years prior. I closed it and picked up another, and then another, until I had examined them all. Catherine's library was selective, and its worn state showed it had been well used, though not entirely for its intended purpose. Scarcely a chapter had escaped a pen and ink commentary, or at least the appearance of one, covering every bit of blank space the printer had left. Some entries were just isolated sentences. Others took the shape of a conventional diary, scribbled in a clumsy, childlike script. At the top of an extra page, likely a prized find at the time, I was delighted to see a striking caricature of my friend Joseph, crudely, yet effectively drawn. This sparked an immediate curiosity about the mysterious Catherine, and I set about deciphering her faded symbols. "An awful Sunday," began the paragraph below. "I wish my father were back. Hindley is a terrible replacement. His treatment of Heathcliff is appalling. H and I are planning to revolt. We took our first step this evening. The rain poured all day. We couldn't go to church, so Joseph insisted on gathering us in the attic, while Hindley and his wife lounged downstairs by a cozy fire, doing anything but reading the Bibles, I'm sure. Heathcliff, the ploughboy, and I were ordered to grab our prayer books and head up. We were lined up on a sack of corn, groaning and shivering, hoping Joseph would shiver too and cut his sermon short for his own comfort. Wishful thinking. The service dragged on for 3 hours, Yet my brother had the nerve to say, when he saw us coming down, "What? Finished already?" On Sunday nights, we used to be allowed to play, as long as we kept quiet. Now even a giggle is enough to send us to the corners. "You seem to forget who's in charge here," the tyrant declared. "I'll take down the first person who tests my patience. I demand absolute silence and sobriety. Hey, was that you, boy? Francis, darling, give his hair a good tug as you pass by. I heard him snap his fingers." Frances obliged with hearty pull, then settled herself on her husband's knee. There they were, like two children, lost in kisses and silly chatter for hours. Foolish talk that would make anyone blush. We made ourselves as cozy as we could afford under the dresser's arch. I had just fastened our pinafores together to hang as a curtain when Joseph barged in from the stables. He tore down my handiwork, boxed my ears, and croaked, "The master's barely in the ground. The Sabbath isn't over and the Gospel's still ringing in your ears. Yet here you are, playing around. Shame on you. Sit down, you naughty children. There are plenty of good books if you'll read them. Sit down and think about your souls." With that, he forced us to rearrange ourselves so we could catch a faint glow from the distant fire, enough to make out the text of the dusty tomes he thrust upon us. I couldn't stand the task. I grabbed my grimy book by the spine and flung it into the dog kennel, swearing I despised a good book. Heathcliff kicked his to the same spot. Then chaos erupted. "Master Hindley," our chaplain shouted. "Master, come here. Miss Cathy has torn the back off. The helmet of salvation, and Heathcliff has stomped his foot into the first part of the broad way to destruction. It's outrageous that you let them carry on like this. Ah, the old man would have disciplined them properly, but he's gone." Hindley rushed over from his cozy spot by the hearth, grabbed one of us by the collar and the other by the arm, and threw us both into the back kitchen. There, Joseph insisted that the devil himself would come for us as surely as we were alive. Comforted by this, we each found a separate corner to await his arrival. I managed to grab a book and a pot of ink from a shelf, pushed the door slightly open to let in some light, and have been writing for 20 minutes. But my companion is restless and suggests we take the dairy woman's cloak and dash across the moors under its cover. A delightful idea. And then, if the grumpy old man comes in, he might believe his prediction has come true. We couldn't be any wetter or colder in the rain than we are here. I assume Catherine followed through with her plan, for the next sentence shifted topics. She became tearful. "How little did I imagine that Hindley would ever make me cry like this," she wrote. "My head aches so much I can't keep it on the pillow, and still I can't stop. Poor Heathcliff. Hindley calls him a drifter and refuses to let him sit with us or eat with us any more. He insists that Heathcliff and I can't play together and threatens to throw him out if we disobey. He's been criticizing our father. How dare he, for being too generous with Heathcliff, and vows to put him in his place. I began to nod off over the dim page. My eyes drifted from manuscript to print. I saw a red, ornate title. 70 times 7, and the first of the 71st. A pious discourse delivered by the Reverend Jabez Branderham in the chapel of Gimmerden Saug. As I half-consciously puzzled over what Jabez Branderham might say on such a topic, I sank back into bed and fell asleep. Alas, the effects of bad tea and a foul mood. And what else could have caused such a dreadful night? I can't recall another night so miserable since I first learned to suffer. I began to dream almost before I lost awareness of my surroundings. I thought it was morning, and I was heading home with Joseph as my guide. The snow lay deep along our path, and as we struggled through it, Joseph wore me out with constant scolding for not bringing a pilgrim's staff. He insisted I couldn't enter the house without one, all the while proudly brandishing a heavy-headed cudgel, which I understood to be what he meant. For a moment, it seemed absurd that I would need such a weapon to gain entry into my own home. Then a new thought struck me. We weren't heading to some ordinary destination. We were on our way to hear the renowned and Jabez Branderham deliver a sermon on the theme of 70 times 7. It seemed that either Joseph, the preacher, or I had committed the first of the 71st, and we were about to be publicly shamed and excommunicated. We arrived at the chapel. I've actually passed by it a few times on my walks. It sits nestled in a dip between two hills, a raised hollow, close to a swamp, where the peaty dampness is said to preserve the few bodies laid to rest there, as if embalmed. The roof has managed to stay intact so far, but with the clergyman's salary being a mere £20 a year, and a house with 2 rooms threatening to collapse into one, no minister is willing to take on the role, especially since it's widely believed that the congregation would rather let him starve than contribute a single penny more to his livelihood. Yet, in my dream, Jabez had a full and attentive audience, and he preached. My God, what a sermon it was! Divided into 490 parts, each as substantial as a typical sermon, each addressing a different sin. Where he found them all, I have no idea. He had his own unique way of interpreting the text, and it seemed essential that the brother commit a different sin each time. They were the most peculiar offenses, strange transgressions I had never imagined before. Oh, how exhausted I became. How I squirmed, yawned, nodded off, and then jolted back to life. I pinched and poked myself, rubbed my eyes, stood up, sat back down, and nudged Joseph to see if he would ever finish. I was trapped, forced to listen to the end. Finally, he reached the first of the 71st. At that pivotal moment, a sudden inspiration struck me. I felt compelled to rise and accuse Jabez Branderham as the perpetrator of an unforgivable sin. Sir, I declared, sitting here within these 4 walls, in one unbroken stretch, I have endured and forgiven the 490 points of your sermon. 70 times 7. I have grabbed my hat, ready to leave. 70 times 7. You have absurdly made me sit back down. The 490th first is too much. Fellow sufferers, seize him, bring him down, and crush him to dust, so that this place may know him no more. You are the one, cried Jabez, after a solemn pause, leaning over his pulpit. 70 times 7. You twisted your face in boredom. 70 times 7. I consulted with my soul. Behold, this is human frailty. This too can be forgiven. The first of the 71st has arrived. Brethren, carry out the judgment written. Such honor belongs to all his saints. With that final declaration, the entire assembly, brandishing their pilgrim staffs, surged around me as one. Unarmed and defenseless, I instinctively grappled with Joseph, my nearest and most aggressive attacker, trying to wrest his weapon from him. In the chaos of the crowd, clubs clashed. Blows intended for me landed on others instead. Soon, the whole chapel echoed with the sound of strikes and counter-strikes. Every man turned against his neighbour. Branderham, not content to stand idle, unleashed his fervour with a barrage of loud knocks on the pulpit boards, which responded so sharply that, to my immense relief, they finally woke me. What had sparked such a tremendous uproar? What had played Jabez's role in the commotion? It was nothing more than the branch of a fir tree brushing against my window as the wind howled past, rattling its dry cones against the glass. I paused, listening with skepticism, identified the culprit, then turned over and drifted back into sleep, dreaming once more, if possible, even more unpleasantly than before. This time, I was aware of lying in the oak closet, distinctly hearing the gusty wind and the driving snow. I also heard the fir branch repeat its irritating sound and correctly attributed it to its source. Yet it vexed me so much that I resolved to silence it if I could. In my dream, I thought I rose and tried to unfasten the window. The hook was soldered into the staple, a detail I had noticed when awake, but had since forgotten. "I must stop it, irregardless," I muttered, smashing my knuckles through the glass and reaching out to grab the bothersome branch. Instead, my fingers closed around the icy little hand of a child. A wave of intense nightmare terror washed over me. I tried to pull my arm back, but the hand clung to it, and a deeply sorrowful voice sobbed, "Let me in! Let me in!" "Who are you?" I asked, struggling to free myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied, shivering. Why did I think of Linton? I'd read Earnshaw 20 times. For Linton, "I've come home. I lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I vaguely discerned a child's face peering through the window. Terror made me cruel, and realizing it was futile to shake the creature off, I dragged its wrist across the broken pane, rubbing it back and forth until blood ran down and soaked the bedclothes. Still, it wailed, "Let me in," and held on with a grip that nearly drove me mad with fear. "How can I?" I finally said. "Let me go if you want me to let you in." The fingers loosened, and I snatched mine through the hole, hurriedly stacking books in a pyramid against it, and covered my ears to block out the pitiful plea. I seemed to keep them closed for over 15 minutes. Yet, the moment I listened again, the mournful cry was still there, moaning on. "Begone!" I shouted. "I'll never let you in, not even if you beg for 20 years. "It's been 20 years, lamented the voice. "I've been a wanderer for 20 years. Then came a faint scratching at the door, and the stack of books shifted as if pushed from outside. I tried to leap up, but found myself paralyzed, and instead, I screamed in a panic. To my shock, the scream was real. Hurried footsteps approached my door. Someone flung it open with force, and light flickered through the panes above the bed. I sat trembling, wiping sweat from my brow, as the intruder paused, muttering to himself. Finally, in a half whisper, clearly not expecting a reply, he asked, "Is anyone here?" I thought it best to reveal myself. Recognizing Heathcliff's voice, and fearing he might search further if I stayed silent, With this in mind, I turned and opened the panels. The effect of my action is something I won't soon forget. Heathcliff stood by the entrance, clad in shirt and trousers, a candle dripping wax onto his fingers, his face as pale as the wall behind him. The first creak of the oak startled him, like a jolt of electricity. The light flew from his grasp, landing several feet away, and his agitation was so intense, he struggled to retrieve it. "It's only your guest, sir," I called out, eager to spare him the embarrassment of further revealing his fear. I had the misfortune of screaming in my sleep, thanks to a terrifying nightmare. "I'm sorry I disturbed you." "Oh, damn you, Mr. Lockwood. I wish you were at the—" my host began, setting the candle on a chair because he couldn't keep it steady. "And who brought you to this room?" he continued, digging his nails into his palms and grinding his teeth to control his jaws trembling. "Who was it? I'm tempted to throw them out of the house this instant." "It was your servant Zillah," I replied, flinging myself onto the floor and quickly pulling on my clothes. "I wouldn't mind if you did, Mr. Heathcliff. She deserves it. I suppose she wanted more proof that the place is haunted at my expense. Well, it is. Crawling with ghosts and goblins. You have every reason to keep it shut, I assure you. No one would thank you for a night in such a place." "What do you mean?" Heathcliff asked. "And what are you doing?" "Lie down and finish the night, since you're already here. But for heaven's sake, don't make that dreadful noise again. Nothing could justify it unless you were being murdered." "If that little demon had managed to get in through the window, she probably would have strangled me," I replied. "I'm not going to suffer the torments of your hospitable ancestors again. Wasn't the Reverend Jabez Branderham related to you on your mother's side? And that mischievous Catherine Linton, or Earnshaw, or whatever she was called? She must have been a changeling, a wicked little soul. She claimed she'd been wandering the earth for 20 years. A fitting punishment for her earthly sins, I'm sure." Hardly had I spoken when I remembered the connection between Heathcliff and Catherine's name in the book, which had completely slipped my mind until now. I felt a rush of embarrassment at my thoughtlessness, but without showing any sign of my blunder, I quickly added, "The truth is, sir, I spent the first part of the night—" I paused again. I was about to say, reading those old volumes, which would have revealed my awareness of both their written and printed contents. So, correcting myself, I continued, spelling out the name scratched on that window ledge. A monotonous task, enough to put me to sleep, like counting sheep, or I... "What do you mean by speaking to me like this?" Heathcliff roared with fierce intensity. How dare you? Under my roof! God, he's insane to talk this way." And he struck his forehead in a fit of rage. I was torn between feeling offended by his words and continuing my explanation. But seeing how deeply he was affected, I felt a surge of compassion and decided to share my dreams. I insisted that I had never heard the name Catherine Linton before. Yet reading it repeatedly had left such an impression on me that it took on a life of its own when my imagination slipped from my grasp. As I spoke, Heathcliff slowly retreated into the shadows of the bed, eventually sitting down, almost hidden from view. Despite his concealment, I could tell from his uneven, interrupted breathing that he was wrestling with overwhelming emotion. Not wanting to acknowledge that I noticed his struggle, I busied myself with my morning routine, making noise deliberately, checking my watch, and musing aloud about the seemingly endless night. It's not even 3 o'clock yet. I could have sworn it was 6. Time stands still here. Surely we went to bed at 8. In winter, always at 9, and we rise at 4. My host replied, stifling a groan, and I imagined wiping a tear away with the shadow of his arm. Mr. Lockwood, he continued, you could use my room. You'll just be in the way if you come downstairs so early. And your childish cries have banished sleep for me. And for me as well, I responded. I'll walk around the yard until daylight, and then I'll be on my way. You won't have to worry about me intruding again. I've lost all interest in seeking pleasure in society, whether in the countryside or the city. A wise person should find enough company within themselves. Charming company, Heathcliff muttered. Take the candle and go wherever you like. I'll join you shortly. Just stay out of the yard, and the dogs are loose. And the house? Juno stands guard there, so you can only wander around the steps and hallways. But off you go. I'll be there in 2 minutes. I complied enough to leave the room, but unsure of where the narrow corridors led. I paused and unintentionally witnessed a moment of superstition from my host that contradicted his apparent rationality. He climbed onto the bed and yanked open the window, breaking into an uncontrollable fit of tears as he did so. Come in! Come in! He sobbed. Kathy, please come. Oh, Dick, just once more. Oh, my heart's darling. Please, Catherine, listen to me this time. Finally. The ghost displayed the usual whims of its kind, offering no response. Instead, the snow and wind swirled chaotically, reaching even my spot and snuffing out the light. The torrent of grief accompanying this outburst was so intense that my sympathy overshadowed its absurdity. I withdrew, half irritated for having eavesdropped at all, and frustrated for having shared my ludicrous nightmare, which had somehow caused such distress. Though I couldn't fathom why, I carefully made my way downstairs to the back kitchen, where a compactly raked fire allowed me to relight my candle. The only movement came from a brindled grey cat, which emerged from the ashes and greeted me with a plaintive meow. 2 benches, curved to form a near circle, surrounded the hearth. I stretched out on one, and the cat, Grimalkin, claimed the other. We were both nodding off before anyone disturbed our peace. Then Joseph appeared, shuffling down a wooden ladder that disappeared into the ceiling, presumably leading to his attic. He shot a disapproving glance at the small flame I had coaxed to life, swept the cat off its perch, and settled into the vacant spot. He began the ritual of packing a 3-inch pipe with tobacco. My presence in his domain was deemed too brazen to warrant comment. He simply applied the pipe to his lips, crossed his arms and puffed away. I left him to his indulgence undisturbed. After drawing out the last curl of smoke and releasing a deep sigh, he rose and departed as solemnly as he had arrived. Next came a lighter step, and I prepared to offer a good morning, but stopped short, the greeting unspoken. Hareton Earnshaw was muttering his morning prayers under his breath, a string of curses aimed at every object he encountered while searching for a spade or shovel to dig through the snowdrifts. He glanced over the back of the bench, flaring his nostrils, and seemed as uninterested in exchanging pleasantries with me as he was with the cat beside me. From his actions, I gathered that leaving was permitted, so I rose from my uncomfortable seat, intending to follow him. He noticed and, with the end of his spade, pointed towards an inner door, making a non-verbal sound to indicate that was the direction I should take if I wished to move. The door led into the house, where the women were already up and about. Zillah was coaxing flames up the chimney with a massive bellows, while Mrs. Heathcliff knelt on the hearth, reading a book by the firelight. She shielded her eyes from the intense heat with her hand, deeply engrossed in her reading, pausing only to scold the servant for showering her with sparks or to nudge away a dog that persistently poked its nose too close to her face. I was taken aback to see Heathcliff there as well. He stood by the fire, his back to me, concluding a heated exchange with poor Zillah, who intermittently paused her work to lift the corner of her apron and let out a frustrated sigh. "And you worthless—" he erupted as I entered, turning to his daughter-in-law and using an epithet as mild as duck or sheep, though typically left to the imagination with a dash. "There you are, up to your idle antics again. The others earn their keep. You live off my generosity. Put that nonsense away and find something useful to do. You'll pay for the torment of having you constantly in my sight. Do you hear me, you wretched creature?" "I'll put my things away, because you can force me if I don't," the young woman replied, snapping her book shut and tossing it onto a chair. "But I won't do anything else, no matter how much you curse and shout, unless I want to." Heathcliff raised his hand, and she quickly moved to a safer distance, clearly familiar with the force behind it. Not wanting to witness a quarrel, I stepped forward briskly, as if eager to enjoy the warmth of the fire, pretending to be oblivious to the interrupted argument. Both had enough self-control to pause the conflict. Heathcliff shoved his hands into his pockets to resist temptation, while Mrs. Heathcliff curled her lip and retreated to a distant seat, where she remained as still as a statue for the rest of my visit. I didn't stay long. I declined their offer to join breakfast, and, at the first hint of dawn, seized the chance to escape into the open air, which was now clear, still, and cold as intangible ice. My landlord called out for me to wait before I reached the garden's edge, and offered to guide me across the moor. It was fortunate he did, for the entire hillside resembled a rolling white sea. The undulations didn't reflect the actual rises and dips of the terrain. Many pits were filled to the brim, and whole rows of quarried debris had vanished from the mental map I had formed during my walk the day before. I had noticed on one side of the road a line of upright stones spaced every 6 or 7 yards, stretching the entire length of the barren landscape. These were set up and coated with lime to serve as markers in the dark and during snowfalls like this one, which obscured the treacherous swamps on either side from the solid path. But aside from a few dirty spots poking through here and there, all signs of them had disappeared, and my companion had to frequently warn me to veer right or left when I thought I was correctly following the road's twists and turns. We exchanged few words, and he stopped at the entrance of Thrushcross Park, assuring me I couldn't miss my way from there. Our farewells were nothing more than a quick nod, and I pressed on, relying on my own instincts, as the gatekeeper's lodge was still unoccupied. The distance from the gate to the Grange is 2 miles. Somehow, I managed to stretch it to 4, getting lost among the trees and sinking up to my neck in snow, a situation only those who've experienced it can truly understand. Regardless of my meanderings, the clock struck 12 as I entered the house, marking an hour for every mile of the usual route from Wuthering Heights. My housekeeper and her assistants rushed to greet me, exclaiming in a flurry that they had completely given up on me. Everyone assumed I had perished the previous night, and they were just beginning to consider how to search for my remains. I told them to calm down. Now that I had returned and chilled to the bone, I dragged myself upstairs. After changing into dry clothes and pacing back and forth for 30 or 40 minutes to restore some warmth, I retreated to my study, as weak as a kitten, almost too feeble to enjoy the welcoming fire and steaming coffee the servant had prepared for my comfort.